Okay, so super excited to have this conversation today. Two of our subjects from our account are on, so let's just wave and say hello. We have Rabbi Kushner, Ahron Yoel, and please just say hi and introduce yourself real briefly.
Hi, my name hasn't changed. Still Ahron Yoel Kushner.
And in Ohio, you are known as not Ahron Yoel so much, AJ, right? So we had a little issue with AJ because a few weeks ago we had AY, our hairdresser, DJ, sushi maker, and we felt it would be a little confusing. So yes, Rabbi Kushner was kind enough to use his full name on our account. And Sarah, if you could just say hi, I still can't see you, but I know you're there.
Hi. That's a lot of faith, Alex, that you have.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about yourself real briefly.
Who, me?
Yeah.
What do you want to know? You told everyone so much about me in such
a well, I love the love that people showed you this week. It's really nice. A lot of people connected to your story and how much you love Torah, and I thought that was really inspiring. So both of our subjects have done very well with these orthodoxy. Really, a lot of positive comments, definitely resonated. And we have a guest tonight, Rabbi Matson, Rabbi Sruli Motzen. No one really wants to tell them about themselves. I think everyone feels that everyone knows them from their account. We have not done a profile on Rabbi Matson, so you will have to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, and so nice to meet both of you, Rabbi Kushner and Sarah. Nice to see you. I did get to learn a lot about you. So, Alex, you introduced me as someone who is between ultra-orthodox and modern-orthodox. So
yeah, I think so.
I took a little issue with that. It's okay. I'm going to define myself as both. How's that? Can I be both? Does that work?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So I live in Baltimore. I am a rabbi of a shul in Baltimore called Ner Tamid. We'll probably maybe talk a little bit about the shul as we go along. It's defined by some as modern Orthodox shul. We officially call it an Orthodox shul. And I think maybe to that point of being both ultra-Orthodox and modern Orthodox, I begin every drasha by saying Good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. And that has almost like become a little bit of a slogan. We're big tent. Yeah, I've been living in Baltimore for about 20 years now, originally from Canada. I have 5 wonderful children and an amazing spouse. And that's all I got for now.
Okay, beautiful. Well, we're definitely going to hear more from everybody. And our title tonight is Ultra-Orthodoxy and Modern-Orthodoxy. And, you know, we're not here to compare and contrast and get into all the nitty-gritties of whatever we want to call these labels, philosophies, movements, whatever it may be. But honestly, I find this, to me, why I'm excited about this evening tonight is such an opportunity, because so often we're talking at each other and we're talking about each other, but are we talking with each other? And something that Pieces of Orthodoxy does is really embrace the diversity in the Orthodox community. And we have people on our account, and we show Jews on our account of all different stripes and types of Orthodox Judaism. And for us to sit down and have a conversation together about our differences, about our similarities, I think is hugely meaningful. I honestly can't remember the last time I saw a dialogue and conversation about this topic with representatives from each, with each hashkafa. And yes, I will say we are interviewing, I have someone on the account coming up in 2 weeks, and he discusses how, actually he grew up in Baltimore, and he said that his parents, he didn't even know anything of labels. His parents, they're Orthodox. He knew that he was Orthodox, but what kind of Orthodox? What hashkafa, right, left, this, that? He didn't even know. And I think there is tremendous beauty to that. But I also don't want to diminish that, yes, there are specific ideological beliefs that often people who belong to various camps are proud of, and it's nothing that needs to be whitewashed and just say, oh yeah, we're all Orthodox. It is true, but I think it is important to sometimes discuss some of these beliefs and tenets of Orthodox Judaism and how they vary and how they're similar. So nonetheless, to just give us an overarching direction, someone shared with me this beautiful idea that a person once wrote a letter to Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he used the term Orthodox Judaism. Big deal. The Lubavitcher Rebbe called him out. And in the Lubavitcher Rebbe's response to this man, he said, quote, "I must point out to you that splitting Judaism into Orthodox, conservative, and Reform is a purely artificial division. For all Jews share one and the same Torah given by the one and same God. Well, there are more observant Jews and less observant ones. To tack on a label does not change the reality that we are all one." And I am sure the Lubavitcher Rebbe would agree that with all the quote unquote labels within Orthodoxy, this applies as well. Okay, so we're going to get started. Let's start with you, Sarah. You discussed modern orthodoxy actually in your post. I still can't see you, but we're going to be fine. You discussed that you remember overhearing your mother talking with her friends about if your parents and your family was modern orthodox, what that even meant. You also are fascinating to me, Sarah. You are named after Sarah Schneer, who I don't think they had any labels back then in the 1800s, modern, ultra, Haredi. That certainly didn't exist, but we know that the Beis Yaakov movement is associated with, we want to call the ultra-orthodox, Haredi, Yeshivish, whatever we want to call it, all those terms interchangeable, world. And I'm so curious what your thoughts are about what modern orthodoxy is, what its main beliefs are, and if you'd like to speak personally also, if you find that a label fits you or is not helpful, I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
There are so many things that have been going through my head just now as you've been talking, as Rabbi Matson was talking. And there, ever since you asked me to be part of this conversation, I've had thoughts, flitting around my head. What do I want to talk about? What is modern orthodoxy? I actually Googled it at one point. I was curious what would happen, and somewhat predictably, I think, all the results, even just scanning the results page, the first results page, I could see the very different approaches that different writers take, and trying to define what is modern orthodoxy. The two things that you mentioned just now, when we had our interview and you put in the profile about my mother talking to a friend debating whether or not we were modern orthodox. So something that I don't remember her really discussing modern orthodoxy as such with me, except for retelling that conversation. I don't even know how it came up. I didn't grow up, beating the drums, we're modern orthodox or anything like that. And I think for my mother, to mention the irony that you pointed out in my being named for Sarah Schneer, it was my mother who sent me off to learn Gemara for the summers. And we're trying to, sort of ask her about that because in my mind, Beis Yaakov was associated with more right-wing, Yeshivish, ultra-Orthodox, whichever label you want to use, community. And, that was, Sarah Schneer started Beis Yaakov. So, how did that fit with her sending me off to learn Gemara, which was not something that was anything that Beis Yaakov girls were have been known to do. And I think that in her mind, I don't know if she understood the conflict that I was trying to suggest existed. I think to her, it was very natural as far as a continuum, and Sarah Schneer for her and the Beis Yaakov movement for her represented opening up Torah learning for girls and women. And some will say, see, that was a problem and opened a slippery slope. But others will say, oh, it was the first step to saying women, in our day and age need to learn, the concerns. And however one understands the texts behind people saying that there are concerns with it, which I just gave a class on this, I'm very aware of those texts and also ways to, different ways that they're read and understood and applied. And I think for my mother, and she did a good job of instilling this in me also. It really was a continuum. She believed in education for girls, and that came out, in appreciation for her Beis Yaakov education very much. And it came out in, in sending me off to learn Gemara in the summers also. And there was another time that I tried to ask her something about, a conflict that at least I perceived at the time between the fact that she had gone to Beis Yaakov and that she was an attorney, a corporate lawyer for my entire life. She graduated law school when I was a toddler, I think, and she worked as a lawyer. She worked more hours. I found out later it was officially full and part-time, but it always seemed to me like the bigger part of time. And I, asked her once about that, thinking that it seemed like there was a discrepancy between that. And she, again, didn't see what the issue was. So to her, that really all was a continuum, and there weren't necessarily labels that needed to be attached to things. If you ask me, I think, in general, I share Rabbi Matson's, sort of hesitation about taking the label that's been attached to me. People will say, oh, so, you're modern Orthodox. I say, well, what do you mean by that? This is the pitfall of trying to talk to someone who's raised by a philosopher and a lawyer. What do you mean? That's how I answer everything. I would say also, am I modern orthodox? That's probably the best way to describe me. Has to, and I do believe that labels are useful sometimes, but try to pin me down to what it means. It might mean different things than it means to other people, and we could talk about the details.
Right. I think socially it means different things to different people, but in terms of like a philosophical level, could you describe, if someone wants to know, like what is the main beliefs of a modern orthodoxy? Could you describe like four main principles that modern orthodoxy ascribes to?
So it's funny you mentioned three. I was talking to a friend the other day who had seen the flyer that we were going to be doing this, and said to me, and I remember hearing it also, neither one of us remembered who originally made this division, who suggested that modern orthodoxy can be summed up as Medina, the state of Israel, valuing, I guess, the state of Israel as a religious Zionism, Mada, valuing secular studies, and women, which I think is maybe the most amorphous part of one of the three in terms of what that means to different people who might identify as modern Orthodox, and the issue being how much do women learn text in terms of text, how much do women play an active role in a synagogue setting, how much leadership, how much things like that, how public, things like that. So there are a lot of different issues that come up, and I think the general perception is modern orthodoxy is basically heavily aligned with religious Zionism. It certainly values secular studies and tends to be more open to more religious, I hesitate to even use the words, to more open public kinds of religious engagement that might typically traditionally have been more in the men's court. But a lot of that is so hard to define and means so many different things to different people in terms of the details. I actually, and I say it, and I see the truth, I guess, or the accuracy to some degree in stating those three values as a definition of modern orthodoxy. On the other hand, I have a friend who I don't know if she would identify as ultra-orthodox per se. I've tended to think that was more of an externally applied label, but she definitely sends her kids to schools that would be labeled as ultra-orthodox, let's say, who hired me for a while as a Gemara tutor because she thought that it was important and valuable and permissible for women to learn Gemara, and she wanted to have that opportunity. So,
I think where did you on that? I'm so glad you mentioned that, Sarah, because and Rabbi Matson, I'd like to hear your thought on this. I think there's so many in the Orthodox community that are not card-carrying members of anything per se. You mentioned that list, and what happens if someone says, I strongly believe in 2 out of 3 of those tenets, or 1 out of 3, or when I think of modern orthodoxy, I think of more of an embracing of the secular world and secular society, sort of as informing much of a person's life and how they interact with the world. But someone may live a more modern Orthodox lifestyle in terms of their engagement with the secular world, and again, of course, seeing it through the prism of Torah, not just wholesale acceptance of everything in the secular world. But may say, but I don't feel the same way about Zionism, religious Zionism. Oftentimes I'm curious, anyone's thoughts, Rabbi Matson, I'd love to hear from you, about this in terms of members of our community who may not fit perfectly within a particular box. And how does that work as being a member of the Orthodox community if you can't stick that label on you perfectly?
Right. I listening, it's a very interesting, very interesting top 3 for modern orthodoxy. I think just looking around, and I think it depends on where you're coming from. Baltimore, the quote unquote yeshiva community of Baltimore may not be seen as ultra-orthodox by some. Everything's relative. But certainly the community here and in many places, I think some of those features like Zionism, they may not call it Zionism, but a love for Eretz Yisrael and a support even of the state of Israel, not just Eretz Yisrael alone, are things which are very much, I think many people who would find themselves in ultra-Orthodox schools or ultra-Orthodox shuls, etc., would certainly identify with. And similarly, when it comes to things like Mada, when it comes to whether it's schooling, and I think a lot of that has changed most recently. I remember when I was in yeshiva, a friend of mine in Lakewood at the time was doing like some closet accounting class. It was like very hush hush, and they would like slip out at the right time, pretend to go on a date, but really they went to get like a degree. And now like everyone, I don't know, not everyone, I don't know, but
it's very different.
Grown. Yeah. It's very, very much changed. Now, of course, that's more utilitarian, whereas someone may argue modern orthodoxy is much more sees as an ideal. But I think, I don't know, in my personal experience, I've seen a lot of those barriers kind of melt away, especially specifically those areas. Now, women, probably, I think you're right, and still, I think many people within, not many people, certainly a significant minority of people within quote-unquote ultra-Orthodox circles. I'm going to have to say quote-unquote every time I say the word ultra-Orthodox and modern.
Yeah, we're going to talk to Rabbi Kushner about this term next, because we keep using it freely.
But you have a significant minority of women who want to see more activity, more involvement, more engagement in the religious sphere. Again, not a majority, but a loud and important minority, I believe, that's taking place. So it's interesting how those are the three defining features, and I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Definitely some of those lines have started to fall.
Right. And Sarah, certainly there, the term modern orthodoxy, right? Like this Torah Madza really only became almost like a term or a thing with Rav Soloveitchik and Torah Madza, the book, correct? Like this wasn't like something that was defined, written about really until the 50s, no?
So I'm not the best one for history. But certainly, and people have talked about the similarities and differences between what we talk about these days as Torah Mada and Rav Shimshon Raphael. She talked about Torah documents, and what exactly was he arguing for? What exactly does Torah Mada mean? I mean, these are the things we talked about, sitting around, not in the YU library, let's say, which I assume that's what they still talk about. What's really value? What do we mean when we say Torah Mada? What does it mean to say Torah in Derech Eretz? And how did these things start? I mean, I will say in terms of if we're talking about the definition of modern orthodoxy itself, I really think we have to get at the word, just the words, the plain words, right? We're Orthodox, which means fealty to ancient Jewish legal tradition and law, and that taking that very seriously, and also modern. And I think it's, to me, important, right, to, let's say, embrace or welcome or value participation in the modern world. But again, what that means to different people and the type of, the way that people value that, I think it's important to, and my sense is that I'm not alone in this, in what might be called, I'm going to say it also, the quote unquote modern Orthodox community, is that it's important that it's an and, not a but, right? I don't think that we want to say we're Orthodox, but we embrace the modern world, because if that's a but, then they're in conflict, and we can't, then, how could I embrace something that's a but to the Torah, that's really in conflict to the Torah? I think we accept it as being in tension sometimes, sometimes specific, situations call for, okay, what does the Torah say about this? What do modern, what do I think about it in terms of the modern lens? Do they fit together? Do they not fit together? But it's, I think it's important that they go together, and then we kind of try to figure out, everyone sometimes in different ways or in different circumstances, what exactly that means.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Okay, so Rabbi Kushner, you've been listening. I just randomly said, okay, Sarah, you're modern Orthodox, and Rabbi Kushner, you're ultra-Orthodox. I gave you just these labels. I asked if you would be part of this live and be representative of these movements, and now here we are saying quote unquote the whole time. So Rabbi Kushner, tell us, what does ultra-Orthodox mean to you? Is that a label that you would even use to describe yourself? And you're very interesting because you are a Rav also, just like Rabbi Matson, and your shul is incredibly diverse. And, do they see you as quote unquote ultra-Orthodox? What are your thoughts about what that even means?
Well, I've been called by members of my shul modern Orthodox. They kind of think that I'm modern because I accept act in a way what they have been reading about the ultra-orthodox. They sit on the other side of the aisle, or they have to have a mechitza. You can't have a meal together, etc. So I can't really answer what ultra-orthodox is. I think the diversity in ultra-orthodox is greater than orthodox to ultra-orthodox. There's nobody in ultra-orthodox labels themselves ultra-orthodox. They just think that they're doing the right thing. They think this is their minhag or their Masorah that they have from their parents, and they don't extra. I mean, more than you're supposed to. You're
Rabbi
a chassid.
Kushner, hold on 1 second.
You're doing more than
Rabbi
is
Kushner, hold
expected
on
from you. I think everybody is serving Hashem the way they think they're supposed to serve. So from modern to ultra to do whatever is expected from them. Called ultra-orthodox. Most people that differently don't focus much on that. Today you see that a lot of things that 30 years ago wasn't common in the Hasidic communities is pretty with everybody else. Up in Lakewood, my childhood was in Lakewood, and there was only 2 restaurants in Lakewood. They've been growing up over there, living a more Yeshivish life, which would be labeled ultra-orthodox, going out or having restaurants, the way most people would have, was not accepted. But today everything is the same. We good?
Rabbi Matson, do you hear him?
The sound is cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, now he's completely. Okay, Rabbi Kushner, if you can hear me, can you just check your internet? I can see you now, but yeah, the whole time for me, you were cutting out most of the time. Same, Rabbi Matson?
Yes.
And sorry, I can't see you, so I'm not even going to ask you. Oh, was it the same for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you did you turn off your Wi-Fi? Let me try that. Okay. You want to try talking again?
I'm seeing, I think he looks frozen to me.
Yeah, it's frozen. Yeah. In the future, we're going to laugh and say, remember the old days when we had Instagram lives? There's going to be a much better way to do this. Okay, Rabbi, go ahead. Let's see how this works. Did you change your internet by any chance? Oh, he's frozen again. Okay, as he's getting on, did any of you hear enough of what he said to comment? I did not.
One thing I heard that sounded like he was talking about was in terms of perception and relativity, right? People looking at him and thinking that he's modern because he doesn't match with their perceptions.
I did.
Of ultra-orthodox, which I think is a huge point.
Rabbi Kushner, can you speak? Let's see.
Yes.
Let's see if this works.
Let's
try again. Yeah, continue. No.
I turned on and turned off
Is it your Wi-Fi? Did you turn off your Wi-Fi? I feel so bad. Huh?
I heard that.
Can you hear me now? I don't have Wi-Fi on.
Your Wi-Fi is on?
Yeah.
It's not on.
Okay, well, we just heard you, so keep going. Let's try.
can't hear you.
No.
Okay. I don't think rules.
That was strange. It's
Is
just in
there a
and
way
out.
to
I just
call
heard
in?
I don't think there are any rules, and now we can't hear you at all.
It's so frustrating.
Did you hear if he
Well,
said he turns off his Wi-Fi or not? Because that's one thing that helps.
I think he said it's off. Yeah.
Oh, it is
Yes,
off.
I turned it off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those-
Well, we just heard you speak now, so just try again.
Okay, if you can't hear me,
Yeah.
I think it's
No.
very diverse in what they call ultra-orthodox. Like we mentioned before, there are ultra-orthodox that are lawyers, women that are lawyers. There's an ultra-orthodox female judge in Brooklyn. That's something that wouldn't fly, though. And what people label ultra-orthodox is also very different. I didn't see, by Hasidim, they consider themselves ultra-orthodox, and the crowd considers themselves ultra-orthodox. Hasidim, a woman, I'm talking about like the real Hasidim, like Williamsburg, Monroe, those who follow it to the T, a woman that drives is considered modern.
Right.
In Lakewood and in Borough Park, Muncie, it's kind of normal for a woman to drive. I mean, New Square, you can't even stand on the same street, at the same side of the street where the men, they have a separation for men and women. Now, everybody, people in Borough Park, people in New Square, people in Monroe, people in Lakewood, all consider themselves ultra-Orthodox. If you ask them, Orthodox are you? They'll tell you, ultra-Orthodox, we're extreme. So it's hard to answer what the difference is. I think there's a greater gap, what people consider ultra-Orthodox, considering modern or the mainstream Orthodox.
Mm-hmm. What about this term Haredi? Do you find that more of an exclusively Israeli term, or would you use it interchangeably with ultra-Orthodox?
I did usually more, it's somebody who is not a Zioni, so not a Zionist, then he must be a Haredi.
Mm-hmm. So it's more defined in relation
It's
to
either
Israel,
you're a regular Jew or
not necessarily.
The way I see people use it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's what I see people using it. So they wouldn't call a young Israel.
Mm-hmm. What about the term Yeshivish? Where would that fit in the spectrum in ultra-Orthodoxy? Is that also interchangeable?
Yes. Rabbi Matson mentioned that the yeshiva in Baltimore, they're Yeshivish yeshiva. Now, mainstream.
My husband's is a alum. They say it's not Yeshivish.
Is a graduate.
Depends which
There's
team you
black hats,
had.
but some say it's not Yeshivish, which is all the little nuances.
Really? So, when my Haredi,
It depends where you went.
I'm sorry.
I think it really depends.
Whose share you in?
It depends whose share you went.
I hear. I did.
There's some rabbi in one way, and some are different. Rabbi Feldman is very different than the previous Rosh Yeshiva.
That is true. That is true.
And his hashkafa about the state of Israel is very different too.
That's right.
But I think it's interesting, as you're saying, there are individuals who can come out of institutions, right, who may not be exactly card-carrying members. I think there's a lot of individuality even within some of these, philosophies and labels.
yes.
I mean, Berlin, two different people. Two different, they don't really dance to the same beat.
So, Rabbi Kushner, you're breaking up a little bit. I'm going to
Tell us.
ask you one question. Yeah. Right. These are all different. For those who are not familiar, these are all different yeshivas within the ultra-Orthodox world who each have their own flavor. So let me ask you, Sarah was able to sort of define modern Orthodoxy by these three terms in terms of, hold on. Let me get it right.
Lots of
Medina, was that the first one?
I mean, I don't know if there's an order to it, but
Right.
Medina, Mada,
Medina,
and
Mada. So Medina is the state of Israel. Mada is, secular studies, secular society, and women. Is there a way that you might define some of the overarching beliefs of an ultra-Orthodox Jew? And I'm most curious from you in terms of their attitude towards secular world and secular society. And let's see if we can hear him.
For some, it would be the opposite of Medina, Mada, and women.
Okay.
You get in trouble when you define your entire as anti something else. Yeah.
Right, that's right.
He didn't say anti, he said opposite.
There. Good point.
The opposite.
There.
And for some, it would just be watered down.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you need to learn Torah. I remember 30 years ago, there was a sefer put out that women should not learn Chumash and Rashi. And some schools were very, again, ultra-Orthodox, were very excited. They don't even teach Chumash Rashi for girls.
This is like extreme elements on the spectrum.
I mean, they were against the whole. I don't know if they were against, but they did not follow the Beis Yaakov way of studying.
Mm-hmm.
They had very little, very minimum amount of Torah that they taught the girls, more halachos, and they taught them how to bake and how to knit and how to sew.
Mm-hmm. No one ever taught me that.
So
I know, right? Like you could totally dig through a Gemara, but I know we really needed cooking and sewing classes in high school.
Alongside the Gemara.
They say a story. I never saw this written down, but they say a story that two girls came and asked a question on a Rambam. Reb Shach went to the kitchen of his house and asked them, to have a cookie. And do you guys know? And he asked the girls, "Do you know how to bake these cookies?" They said, "No. You learn how to bake these cookies first before you ask me on the Rambam." I don't know.
I've never heard any of these stories before. This is why we have Rabbi Kushner on this live. I've heard a lot of stories, but this is new to me.
So, so again, I can't. For some, it's it of Medina, Mada, and women. For some, it's just watered down, and for some, they don't even realize that people them as ultra-Orthodox.
Right. Meaning some people could be like, all right, I am more Yeshivish leaning. I learned in traditional yeshivas. did not learn in a modern Orthodox setting. I'm just Orthodox. Some people are frustrated by the fact that the media often will, call all Orthodox people ultra-Orthodox, and their ultra-Orthodox has more connotations of like Hasidish. You know what I mean?
I once heard very.
But it's hard to use the word. It's hard to use the word Hasidish because it refers to, and at the same time, Lubavitch, they refer to themselves as Hasidish. And you want to put a picture of a Chassid, nobody expects to see a Lubavitch and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
When everybody refers to Hasidish, somebody with long payas and a beard, and his wife is maybe wearing something over her sheitel, or she doesn't wear a sheitel at all, wears a tichel or something like that. So, hard to answer the rules how to become a card-hold member of the ultra-Orthodox community.
All right, Matson, you have something to add?
Yeah, I once heard a wonderful definition by Ramosha Tarragon, or he was being somewhat cynical, but also quite serious about this, and he was describing the Dati Leumi community in Israel as opposed to the Haredi community, and there are similarities, but also important differences between both those communities in America. But nonetheless, I think there is a lot of truth to the definition. He said the Haredi community is very good at Yira, which is really what the word Haredim really comes from, and the Dati Leumi community is really good at Ahava. At love. One is good at fear. And I think when we're getting into all the details, but I think when we think about the predominant mitzvah, the predominant characteristic that really defines and animates much of what we're doing, I think that's a pretty good definition. I think that really got brought home to me. I remember once I went to the mirror for a little while along the lines of all my different jump between different types of yeshivas. And I remember once having an interesting conversation, arguments with one of the prominent rabbis there about different approaches to learning Gemara in general. And he acknowledged to me, I'm not allowed to say his name because this was not acceptable, but he once went to listen to Rav Lichtenstein, who is the Rosh Hashiva of Gush, which is the modern-Orthodox flagship, or one of the modern-Orthodox flagships in Israel. And he went to a shir of this, and he was telling me how much, I'm sorry to say this, how much he hated it. Personally, I'm a big Rav Lichtenstein fan. But he said the reason he hated it was because he allowed Rav Lichtenstein asked everyone for their opinion, and then he unpacked each person's opinion, right? And basically said we could go at it this way, we could go at it B, C, D, and kind of acknowledge and accept each of these approaches. Whereas the approach, just to use the mirror as an example, when it comes to learning, the approach is there is one possible solution, okay? And they're going to go through all the different possible explanations and ultimately come to one singular place. And in some respects, that also is that Ahava Yira type of approach. There is, I think, the sense of openness and allowing for different opinions and different possibilities within Orthodoxy, outside of Orthodoxy, within the Ahava community, like more of that place of acceptance and love. Whereas there's an approach which is much more pulling in, and whether that's expressed in the sense of being, whether it's certain restrictions, but also in terms of a philosophy in life of basically saying there's only one way. I can't even entertain a possibility of something else. And I think if we were to simplify in some way, but I think these two animating characteristics of these two communities, that's one way, at least that I like to think about, categorize these two communities.
Well, I was thinking the term Haredi, Harad means fear. Now, I heard that actually was a name that was put on the ultra-orthodox community by the media, that apparently it's not something that was actually an internal name. But
neither Orthodox.
I'm sorry?
Orthodox also was a response to it.
Right.
Yeah.
And fear, by the way, does not have to have always negative association. There's one of the beauties of the ultra-orthodox community is this Yiras Hashem, fear of Hashem, that translates into a meticulousness in terms of mitzvah observance. And that I think is a defining, beautiful characteristic, so I think that's fascinating. Sorry, you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, but Alex, exactly to that point. Meaning, I think each, like with all of us, all of their strengths are their weaknesses. If we were to go through some of the challenges that you deal with in the community, which is all about Yira, we can start unpacking them. Are things too intense, or things too restrictive, et cetera, et cetera? And you go to a community where there's too much love, you're also going to have, there's something beautiful about it, and it's appealing to me. But at the same time, there are certain inherent problems when perhaps your arms are a little bit too wide, open, what they're willing to accept, and what that does for future generations, et cetera. So, yes, Yira is good and bad. And
yes, that's so important. There's always nuance, and there's going to be pros and cons to both sides. But in terms of embracing the secular world, I do think there's a stronger sense of, there's a Yira there in terms of the right-wing community, in terms of, and in the modern Orthodox community, it is part of the very philosophy that, I'm not a spokesperson, so I do not want to mess this up, but we embrace the secular world. Sorry, you can speak to this a little bit. And not only that, our Torah learning is enhanced by secular studies and by the embracing of the Torah world. There's a slippery slope there too. So pros and cons. Let's continue. I know we have to start a little bit later. Let's talk a little bit about the things that we feel our quote unquote camp is doing well at, is really, succeeding at as a community, and the areas that we feel that this community needs improvement in. So Sarah, I'll let you get started with that.
Oddly enough, this was the hardest question for me. I think, and as hard as it was to say, okay, please define modern orthodoxy, in 4 minutes or however long or less, that one was extremely hard. And I don't know how well I did it. This one was hard, I think, for me because in my own mind, the values that I identify with, if I'm going to, accept the designation, right, and slap this label on myself of modern orthodoxy, it's because I agree with what I see as the basic philosophy. So in my mind, the ideas, the values are what we're doing right. That's, by definition, once I'm in the camp like that, that's because I think that, the underlying values in philosophy and mode of thought, let's say, represent an excellent approximation of truth. How's that for being philosopher's daughter?
Mm-hmm.
But it's much easier than to identify the places that we need improvement, because how much does anyone ever, unfortunately, how much does anyone really live up to their complete ideals all the time?
Right.
It's very hard to say we're succeeding in this. It's a lot easier. I remember years ago, someone who was much more in tune to this kind of thing than I am, using an analogy of drums, that if you're listening to music and you hear and the drums are good, you don't notice. But if the drummer makes a mistake, that's when you notice, right? So like if the things that are good, you don't really notice, right?
Right.
So I think that is hard for me. I think in my mind, I think there's a complexity and openness. I would agree with that, to modern Orthodox thought, and that appeals to me greatly. So if we are actually doing that, then that's what I think we're doing that well. I think I would like to think that we have the Abba side down well, as Rabbi Matson was saying. I hope that's true. Mm-hmm. I think in many ways we do.
And by the way, is Abba like Ahavas Yisrael, loving fellow Jews? How would you define the Abba, Sarah? Or Rabbi
openness.
Matson, what did that mean?
All of it. It's an outward approach. It's loving God. It's like the joys, looking for the joys. It's like never the talk. It's always like the uplifting one. It's loving of other Jews. It's an outward approach. I think that's going to be so many different ways.
Okay.
And acceptance, I think, and inclusion, right? All these words I think people will find in modern Orthodox, the statements of modern Orthodox shuls or schools or any of that. Which I have to say, another bit of research that I did in preparation for tonight was to go on the websites of the two shuls that I'm a member of, and neither one of them seemed to say modern Orthodox. I don't know what that says about me, about them, about Orthodoxy in general, about the internet, but it's
about how well someone wrote their website. But okay,
it's so I could definitely speak to areas where I think like various segments of modern Orthodox communities could improve. There's to say, we're coasting along, perfectly on whatever elements. I'm finding that difficult, I think.
Okay, so Sarah, I'm going to pause. We have a comment, and by the way, if anyone has any questions, we unfortunately are not going to have too much time, because I did promise we're going to end around 10. But someone here mentioned in the comments, I think modern Orthodox is doing well overall financially and supporting their families. But the modern Orthodox flaw is less Torah learning sometimes and less chumras and more leniencies. So that's a strong observation there. And I think we're not trying to be judgmental here. I think that we all really need to look at ourselves too, as individuals, and see how we could all improve. But Rabbi Kushner, tell us what your thoughts are in terms of however you want to define the ultra-Orthodox community, what it's doing well and what areas it needs to improve. Are you there? Yeah.
I think they're going very, very fast.
Yes.
I think they're growing fast. Can you hear me? Find themselves in a way. I think sustain themselves very well. I think they do sustain themselves financially. I know in Eretz Yisrael, you don't have too many modern Israelis coming to collect. Versus when it comes to Meshulachim, tell me how a Meshulach looks. You're always going to tell me, the guy with a long jacket, with a flat hat, with a big beard, who has 12 kids, and he has to marry off a bunch of kids. It does put a bad picture on how they take care of themselves. The flaws that I think is that they really believe, most ultra-Orthodox, only their way, and there's anyone who's not following their way is doing it wrong. They're going against halacha or going against the Torah, etc. And every shiva and there are heterim that maybe you don't want to hold by. You know, if you don't like that somebody drinks chalav stam,
Is he breaking up?
Yeah, I lost your record.
Okay. Let's just see. Keep talking. Is he talking?
Are you there?
Yeah, now.
Can you hear me?
Now, yeah. No, in and out. Okay, so that's interesting. Rabbi Kushner was saying this attitude of, for lack of better words, my way or the highway, sort of an elitism, that the way that we're doing it as ultra-orthodox Jews is the right way, and other philosophies
Again,
are
I don't think that there's the flaws are more than looking at yourself and thinking you are doing the right thing and nobody else is, and anyone who doesn't follow your way is
Okay, Rabbi Kushner, I'm so sorry that you seem to
Right.
have been breaking up a lot. We're going to come back to you. I'm going to swing to Rabbi Matson. Any comments on this piece as someone who I think fits, as we said, in the middle? You can tell us a little bit about your shul also in terms of where you feel you identify and put yourself on the Orthodox spectrum. I think that you bring like a valuable voice to this conversation in that respect.
Right. Yeah, I think it touched upon such real points. You know, some of those pros, some of those cons. You know, maybe just expand a little bit, and then maybe just speak personally. But you know, there is something because of that my way or the highway. You know, again, I want to go back to what I said before. The strengths of each community is going to be their weakness, and so a my way and your high or the highway approach, in some respects, that sense of confidence, self-confidence in what you believe in. We don't have such good data in the U.S., but it seems like the attrition rate in the ultra-Orthodox, Haredi, Yeshiva, whatever you want to call it, community is far lower, meaning many more people are sticking around. And yes, there's a birth rate that impacts it, but ultimately it seems, aside from, you know, there's more high-profile people leaving from the ultra-Orthodox community, but ultimately there are more people sticking around, and there's something about that passion that you're able to maintain. You say, like, this is it, this is the truth, there's nothing else, and that's invaluable, you know. And when you think about like our values as a people, Judaism, sticking it out, like staying Jewish, staying connected to God, staying connected to the Torah, it's hard to compete with that. And at the same time, I'll say, and just again to amplify some of what Sarah was talking about, there's that openness and that approximation. You know, there's exposure to like beautiful ideas and beautiful Torah. You know, there's so many books that the modern Orthodox world will take everything in, right? Or whoever wants to find themselves that way. And so there's so much literature, so much out there that expands people. I'll just speak my own personal, you know, my exposure to that literature and literature beyond the yeshiva is just, it's expansive. It grows you as a person. And so there is so much to gain in that respect. Again, because of that openness, it opens the door to loss. I think, you know, in terms of the shul, or maybe just talk about myself, you know, my go to what I guess you call yeshiva type school. They go to Beis Yaakov type school and yeshiva, not a modern Orthodox school. I'm the rabbi of modern Orthodox shul. And, you know, for me, the philosophy is, you know, I struggle with this whole entire conversation of labels is a challenge. Because on the one hand, like Sarah, I did not grow up with any discussion about labels. My mother was born in Galveston, Texas. My father went to Panovich. That doesn't tell you everything.
Wow, how did that shit up happen? That's fascinating. You don't have to answer, but yeah.
It's all good. They're not married.
Wouldn't happen these days, right?
Actually, okay, anyway. So the point is that there was no question, there's no discussion about those things, and in some ways that's great and beautiful. But there's also there is this like trend where everyone's kind of picking and choosing, and I see people all the time, well, I'm going to pick up a Gartel, and I'm going to learn a little bit of Rav Nachman, and I'm going to do a little bit of this.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And it's beautiful, and it personally appeals to me. I love it. And at the same time, there's something about being anchored down with a certain identity. We live in a pretty confusing world, you know, and the whole notion of identity is like pretty fluid. And I mean that in the most basic sense. And just to have something which this is who you are. This is, what your parameters are. I think there's something to gain over there. So as my mouth, I don't live that life. I don't box myself. But I think there's incredible value of having a certain place and having a certain identity that you say, this is me, and it gives you certain comfort. This is my community. I can rely on this community. I know what I could do because I'm always going to turn to, this is what we do in our modern Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, yeshiva. But that's not a small thing. And the running around is dizzying, I think, for
I've been just thinking about this on Shabbos, actually. Exactly what you're saying in terms of, it's nice in a way to be like, oh, well, I like this about this philosophy, and I like that about that philosophy. And I think a lot of us, we sort of do pick and choose. And as I said, it's sort of hard to pin us down. But at the end of the day, you sort of need to choose a general system you're going to educate your children in. I think when it comes to Bein Adam L'Chavero, we should be accepting of all and have a big open tent in terms of who our friends are and, who we accept as, in our homes and who we invite. And I think that's really beautiful. But, that we should, it doesn't matter what label you have, we're all Jews. You can all come to my home. But I do think at the end of the day, I do think it is important to have some direction. And if we're just picking and choosing what feels good and what we like, that is hard in terms of we have this idea of Masorah in terms of transmitting something stable to our children. It's going to be hard.
Yeah, and the truth notion of like find, some people, I hear people complaining, I can't find the community that fits perfectly. It's like,
right.
I don't have a single pair of pants that fit perfectly. Like, what does that even mean to find something that fits perfectly? Like, you have to find something which works for you. And am I humble? Something which it will hopefully push you to aspire, like a community which is, so to speak, a little bit above you. So you're kind of, like being that the tail of the lion, so to speak, as opposed to on the other side of it. And then you work it out. You accept. You agitate for change when it's necessary, but it's going to fit perfectly. And
that's so important. And you need a rabbi, right? I mean, we have 2 rabbis here. It's a huge tenet of our belief. Oh, they're overrated. You need a mentor, you need a rav, and it doesn't mean they're going to 100% align, but someone who can guide you. It's a very, very important part. Rabbi Matson, looks like your internet's a little bit better. You want to try one more time? Any closing comments or discussion today?
Sorry, was that me?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to say Rabbi Kushner. Excuse me.
Okay.
I think he moves rooms.
I was never given. Right.
Yeah.
I was never given that compliment to be called Rabbi Matson. That's great.
We look alike.
Yeah, that's right.
That's already beard look.
Especially.
Before you make your finding.
We did alike when my video was off.
Before you say, I've been meaning to ask you because of all the ins and outs. Do you identify yourself as ultra-Orthodox? Is that a label that you use comfortably?
No.
No. So tell us.
I don't think so. Those who really believe that they are ultra-Orthodox would consider me maybe conservative.
Okay.
Or no, I have been in a shul years ago that one of.
Oh no, we're losing a story.
Oh, I poor
ask you if your wife wears a shaitel.
You were fine before.
Okay.
And if you wear a shaitel,
we're
you
not
cannot
hearing him.
Yes. Are you able to hear me now?
You have to understand, you're in and out. Something about if you wear a shaitel, you can't stop for the Amud. I have no idea what you're saying.
Sounds like a great story.
Yeah, right.
Can you try again?
I said several years ago, one of the questions they would ask you if you wanted to daven for the Amud in this shul was, does your wife wear a shaitel? Okay. And if she does wear a shaitel, you cannot daven for the Amud.
I am confused.
Wait, a shaitel is opposed to
you're too right wing. You're too right wing.
They were more right wing that shaitel is no good.
Okay.
So I don't think people who can have all of these chumras on them would appreciate that I'm considered ultra-Orthodox.
So what do you call yourself?
My wife does drive.
You're right.
Plain Jew.
A plain Jew. I like that even better.
Reb Gifter once gave a shmooze about this, and he said there's no such a thing as an Orthodox Jew. It's a Torah Jew or a non-Torah Jew. They did ask him about the diversity in Orthodoxy, and he said there's no such a thing as Orthodoxy. It's a Greek word, which you mentioned before, that it's somebody else labeled it to us. We're not Orthodox. We're Torah Jews. We follow what tells us. And if you don't follow what the Torah tells us, then you're not, I don't know. You're going to have to figure out what you want to call yourself.
You're still a Jew.
You're not following the Torah.
Jew. Mm-hmm.
Right. But you're going to have to figure out how you're going to label yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a non-Torah following Jew.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
But...
and your congregants, what do they consider you?
It depends. It depends what they need.
Yeah.
Sometimes they want me to be lenient. Sometimes they want me to be lenient and not have the chumras that I came from. And sometimes my I guess my observance is a contradiction to what they want from me. And certain things there are places to be lenient, and certain things there is no lenient, and all you could say is sorry. This is an Orthodox rabbi, so I have to follow what I was taught, and there's no place for leniencies.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right. Well,
but I explain to them. I do try to explain. I don't like to be the one saying no, and I'm not. Sometimes they can understand, and sometimes they can't. But I still try to explain, the other side of the story.
Right. And also, as a Rav of a diverse shul, you're not imposing your own, chumras or your own minhagim and customs when they're coming to ask you a question, right? Like you have to guide each person according to where they are and what they need.
Correct.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of you. Sarah, I haven't heard from you in a while. If you have any final thoughts before we close out tonight.
I do. Okay. So the question that I'll try to keep it brief because I don't even know what time it is.
Yeah.
But it's as I said, the question that got me, thinking the most in some ways that you had sent earlier on was, where do you think your community could use improvements? And two things that really stand out to me that I often think about are kind of one of them is I'm sort of wistful sometimes for, I think, some of what Rabbi Matson maybe was talking about, but I'm going to give it a different term for amina pshita, like the simple faith. This idea, and I don't, maybe it's a pipe dream anyway, but, maybe people don't have it as much as I think they do. But, I think there is something, as much as I embrace complexity, and that's really what drives me to the communities that I feel, where I feel comfortable, where I feel aligned, is the embracing of complexity and finding the truth and piecing together. There's something to be said also for simple faith that I think we sometimes, over intellectualize or over complicate things. And I think that there could be more of, I'm not going to speak for all of modern Orthodoxy, but I think for a lot of us, it's hard to get to that sort of, more low-key, spiritual, innate sense of God and his presence and a connection with him and faith in him without, but what about this? And what about this? And how do we analyze that? And let me think about the philosophy of this. I think that's it's something that I'm wistful for. I think part of embracing complexity, I think, could be appreciating, the idea of that kind of simplicity. And the other thing I think requires more complexity. You're talking about Torah Umada, the value of secular studies, and it's interesting to hear Rabbi Matson talk about it. Sort of, the growing as a person because of literature beyond the yeshiva and that sort of thing. And I think that that's what Torah Umada is supposed to be. Sort of higher culture, let's say, really, mind expanding study, the intellectual study and growth and the arts to some degree. But I think that we sometimes have trouble drawing the line and remembering, and really giving the thought to what that is. I believe in Torah and therefore I watch CSI Miami, which I have watched CSI. There are a lot of things. I am describing only my own faults here. The movies or the shows that I've seen.
You could have said much worse, Sarah. You're okay.
You are still good to go.
It's the one that came to mind. I saw something about CSI today. That's on my mind. And there are things that I avoid because I don't think they fit with my values, but I think there's definitely a lot of room for us to say, well, we embrace secular culture, so we're gonna, pop down and binge a Netflix series, and okay, what is the value in this? Am I really thinking about it? It was one I remember a few years ago when one of my kids first asked me, am I allowed to listen to secular music? And I paused, as I often do. I find myself often tripping over my words when I try to explain things to my kids. What does Orthodox mean?
Totally.
So she asked me this question, and I said, I listen to secular music. I grew up with it. It's nostalgic for me. It feels like part of who I am. And I said, I can't tell you that you're not allowed to listen to secular music, I think, but I'm going to tell you to be thoughtful about it. And I think that that's a really hard thing to do, and to be intellectually honest about how thoughtful we're being about the media that we consume, about the ways that we engage with secular society, about the high and low culture and, all of that. But I think that that's really an inherent piece of trying to be Orthodox and modern in a way that, really jives together. That I think that, that I often think we could work on more, really maintaining, a thoughtfulness about what we really believe in our kind of everyday decisions.
Right. That's beautifully said, Sarah. And also this doesn't mean that people who align with more the Yeshivish world aren't watching anything on Netflix either. There's so much overlap. None of this is black and white. But we're going to close with this idea, which is so important. We all have to look. No one is sheltered. No one lives in a complete bubble. Even if we think people are sheltered, the bottom line is it's harder and harder these days to be sheltered. So however we ideologically decide how we want to embrace or reject the secular world, the bottom line is we live in the world. And the goal is, like you said, which I think is beautiful, is we have to be thoughtful. We have to be conscious. We have to be making choices. All of us, doesn't matter what label we ascribe to, what philosophy we ascribe to, we have to be looking at the world through that lens of Torah and constantly be on a state of alert to make good choices, hopefully, that help ultimately get us closer to God and not further away from God. So I think that's a great way to close this conversation. And hopefully we've just been able to explore this a little bit deeper and hear from each other. And I found this incredibly valuable. I want to thank you all, Sarah, Rabbi Matson, Rabbi Kushner. I may have mixed you up, but I at least said your names right. I am sorry for the technical difficulties, but hopefully we'll be able to edit this decently. So we'll be on the YouTube channel and you can check it out there. Thank you all so much for your time.